don't know that we needed any. This room's so small, but we have a mic if you need one. So I'm John Judge. This is the 14th annual meeting of the Coalition on Political Assassinations here in Dallas. We had a busy year this year. We had several conferences, regional conferences. They opened a museum at the Audubon Ballroom in New York where Malcolm X was assassinated, and dedicated it to Malcolm and his wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz. So we co-sponsored a meeting there with evidence about FBI involvement in his murder. In February. In April, we went to Memphis and did the first of our regional conferences on Dr. King and called it Killing the Dream. And then in June, we went to Los Angeles and did one on Robert Kennedy called Killing Hope. And on June the 10th, right after that, in D.C., we held our annual commemorative event at the spot at American University, the plaque where JFK gave the speech calling for an end to the Cold War and not a Pax Americana, but real peace and ending the arms race and some of the things that we believe got him killed. We commemorate that talk. A small group of us went out. And then this is the regional meeting that we do every year here in Dallas, and we called this one Killing Democracy. So we're here today and tomorrow. We have a lot of speakers today between 9 and noon, and then we're going to go out to the grassy knoll. We have a moment of silence, some speakers after that at 12:30, and we'll come back here around 2 and go till around 5 o'clock. After that, one option is take a shuttle from here into Oak Cliff at the Texas Theater where Oswald was arrested. They're showing Oliver Stone's JFK. For I think it's $7 or $8. I don't hope it's not sold out, but there you can get tickets online, and also. We usually, in the latter part of the evening after dinner, we show films here, so we have DVDs and VHSs. And we have some speakers lined up this morning, but the first is on a feed from Pittsburgh. Dr. Cyril Wecht, a leading forensic pathologist, former president of the American Academy of Forensic Science, first president of the Coalition on Political Assassinations, and had hoped to be here this year, but was unable to come because of legal trouble that he has with all these counts that were filed against him. He's finally getting close to getting past that. So he'll go from 9 to 10. We have a way to feed some questions in through a chat room. So at the end, when he'll take a break, and then we can have audience questions. If you have for him, we can type them in for you. But he, as far as I know, he's plugged up and ready to go. Do you know what we have to do to get an image of him, Carl?
What's that?
How do we get an image of him?
I'm waiting for him to start it up.
Okay.
A few minutes.
So, okay, so it's a few minutes. Well, other speakers that what we have today, Ben Rogers is here from the Baylor University Pogue Library, where they have an archive dedicated to Penn Jones's work and other assassination materials, and sometimes on Sunday after we break at noon, we drive down there, and he has it set up for a visit if people want to go down and see the library down in Waco. It's about 30, 40 miles to the south, and so it's a little stretch down there, but that's an option that we have on Sunday. And then Robert Groden will probably be here this afternoon. Gerald McKnight was going to speak. He's the curator of the archive of the Harold Weisberg, an early researcher. John Kellen will talk this afternoon. He's written a book about the early critics. Ed Tatro's here at the moment. I don't know if you want to talk in the first part or the second.
Sure.
Want to talk in this part? Okay.
Well, what's the story with the Cyril?
Cyril will go for about an hour. And
Okay,
But when is Cyril going?
we're ready to go.
Huh?
9 to 10.
till 10 o'clock. And then we'll be here till about noon, so I can fit you in between.
Go after Cyril.
If that'll work best for you. I was going to have Ben go, but I mean, I think we're here. So Rex Bradford, also archivist for the Mary Farrell Foundation, is going to talk to us. Mal Hyman's here. So this is feeding in. Mike, could you get the lights at the back? So Ben, his son, was asking, there's a little chat room, we're in touch with the people at that end, but Ben, his son, was asking, can Cyril see the crowd here? Because he's used to talking to people, and we tried to see if we could get a feed in, but we couldn't. So he's just having to imagine you. There's an old joke about the after the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks went out into one of the rural areas with some speakers and started setting them up in the village square and a radio transmitter, and well, the old man came out and hobbled over and he said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, comrade, it's wonderful. You're going to be able, when we get this set up, you're going to be able to hear Mr. Lenin, the head of Russia, speak to you over these loudspeakers. All the way from Moscow, you'll be able to hear Mr. Lenin." And the old guy looked at it for a while and he said, "Will he be able to hear me?" So at least hear from you. With over 80 separate federal counts. You just have to do your job. Cyril Wecht was charged with over 80 federal counts by one of the politicized prosecutors that was brought in, what ended up being a scandal under Gonzales. And the prosecutor, by the time they got to court, dropped it to 42 charges. It's now down to 14. They took the prosecutor's testimony, and his defense attorney asked questions. They didn't even put on any witnesses, and the jury locked without even presenting a defense case. And now they're down to 14 counts that really don't have federal jurisdiction because they're not anything to do with corruption. But every single anomaly that they found in the books or the accounting, or they thought they had something, they made it into a separate federal charge. And then they came in to confiscate the records, and they not only took his accounting records in Pittsburgh and the coroner office records, they took all of his JFK research, all the research he's done on key forensic cases over the years, and confiscated all of that too. And it's been years now that he hasn't gotten it back, and he's spent millions of dollars, I'm sure, fighting this case, and they've had him really under the heat. So, but Cyril's an amazing guy. He's like, "Well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here."
We got the last half of it down. You gotta give me a cue. Did you say it again?
I just said, it's the problem with the 21st century. It holds tremendous potential, and but then when you live in it, it's a different matter. It's kind of like the presidential election. So some of you weren't here last night, but I will tell you it was good news that we got, and that's that since the time of the election, I've gone back to the staff of the House Subcommittee on Information Policy and National Archives, and the chair, Representative Clay, who I was working with because he was a co-sponsor to the bill before, is now going to reintroduce the Martin Luther King Records Act, and there are going to be hearings held on it in his committee. He has jurisdiction over it in March, and probably get it back out on the floor, which will hopefully not only release a lot of documents about Dr. King's life and death, but set yet another standard for this method that the JFK Act was. So that's a development that we got. There. He's live.
John, can you hear me?
I can.
I hope you can. John, I would like to say hello to you and to all the people who are attending the COPA Conference. I regret not being able to be there. And if you were looking out the window here with the snow in Pittsburgh and the freezing type temperature, you'd know how much I regret it. I would prefer to be there in a much warmer Dallas temperature, and especially with friends. I first want to start off by commending and congratulating John Judge. He has been the keystone, the bulwark of our organization. I recall more than a decade ago our meeting in Washington, D.C., Jim Lazar, Gary Aguilar, Jim DiEugenio, and John, and myself, and there were others. We talked about this and came up with the acronym of COPA and forged ahead. And John has been the binding force that has held it together and organized and produced these wonderful annual programs. I miss seeing all of the wonderful people who spoke to you last night and who will be addressing you tomorrow and into Sunday and the events that John and others have scheduled. So I wish you all well, and my apologies for not being with you. I do want to thank John for having arranged this, and my son Ben Wecht, where I am presently located, and talking from his home in this hookup. Modern day technology is a wondrous thing. Well, here we are on the 45th anniversary. We had tremendous programs in Pittsburgh, the Duquesne University Institute of Forensic Science and Law, the 40th anniversary, which is referred to as the Pittsburgh Conference, and we did a wonderful triple header earlier this year for the 40th anniversary of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and the 45th anniversary of John F. Kennedy. It was a wonderful program, and many of the people who are there with you, some of your speakers, and many of you attending the COPA Conference were in Pittsburgh. And we have, by the way, put together a wonderful DVD, as John knows, from that 40th anniversary of the JFK assassination, and that's available. John and my son Ben can give you more details on that, but you should keep that in mind. I think as a collection of the top-notch people covering every important aspect of this case, I'm not aware of any finer collection than that. Well, I'm asked by people, where are we going, what's going to happen, what can we do, will we ever learn the truth, and so on. I wish I had those answers. And frankly, my friends, I wish that I could be as optimistic as I was 30 and 20 years ago in response to the question, will we ever learn the truth? And I used to say, and I meant it, that we would, and it would be in my lifetime. I'm a lot older. I hope I'll be around for a while, but realistically, and I never have wanted to be wrong more in my life about anything than I do in making the statement that I now set forth, that I do not believe it is going to be in my lifetime. Why? I think another generation or two is going to be required for what I refer to as the progeny of all of the people and whatever agencies may have been involved in planning, executing, orchestrating the assassination of Kennedy and the incredible cover-up. There are now first and second generation people who look upon the individuals, whether they know anything or they just realize because of their knowledge and expertise within their respective agencies, that it would have required input from those people. And when I say those people, I don't know specifically who they are. I'm not being cowardly in failing to mention their names. I wish I knew who they are. But those people, and I'll talk about the kinds of people categorically that I think were involved in this a little bit later on. But what I'm saying now is that these people who are responsible for this heinous crime, they were the mentors, they were the rabbis, they were the employers of the individuals who succeeded them. And as I've said, we're now into the second generation. So there are still these personal ties. Think of it, if you would, in some kind of analogous fashion, as a family relationship. Somebody wants to dump on your father or your grandfather or your beloved uncle or great uncle or so on. In another generation or two, we're not going to have that kind of personal relationship. We're not going to have people who can recall in a direct fashion whom they work for, who hired them, and so on. So I think that in another generation or two, we will have reached a point of depersonalization, if I may call it that, a detachment, which will allow people of good faith, if the circumstances are right, to move ahead. Now, another question then that I'm asked is an understandable sequel to what I've just said. Well, Dr. Wecht, how is it possible for all of these things to be covered up all these years and so on? To which I say, we're still being told things that were covered up in World War II, and in the Korean War, and in the Vietnam War. Now, I'm not minimizing, denigrating the significance and importance, or in any way suggesting that we should not be concerned about some of the atrocities and some of the horrible mistakes and blunders and other things that would be a source of embarrassment to us even today from those global conflicts. However, by comparison with the assassination of a president in our country, they pale by comparison. When you talk about, an atrocity in a village in Vietnam, you talk about something from the Korean War. I would like to know about that and correct it and prevent it from happening again, if we should ever become involved in that kind of a ridiculous war again. But still, what great difference did it make? When you talk about the assassination of a president, you're talking about something that is the most sinister kind of crime insofar as an individual is concerned that can be committed. And we're talking about a crime that, without being dramatic, without engaging in retrospective historical embellishment, we can say altered the course of history in the United States of America and in the world. I can't tell you, nobody can, how things would have been different, but there's no way in the world that they would not have been different. Had Kennedy survived, and he definitely would have been elected and served through '68, had he survived and Bobby Kennedy not been assassinated, there's no question in my mind, just in terms of a political analysis, not in terms of what I might have liked to see, but when you look at it and you engage in intelligent political analysis, as retroactive as it must be, then there's no question that Robert Kennedy would have been elected. And that brings me to, of course, an important point. Why was John Kennedy assassinated? Then why was Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King? And my answer to that is admittedly conjectural. Everybody is entitled to their thoughts. This is not my realm of expertise. I'm not a socio-political expert, academician, and philosopher, but I think, again, just pragmatic, retrospective analysis will lead you to the answer. When you've got people like John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and let me preface this remark. I'm not here to give a political speech. I think I know the politics of many people. Maybe you know my politics, but that's not the issue. We're not in a political war right now. So I don't care if there are people who disliked them personally, or people who found their political philosophies and ideologies abhorrent. That's not the point. The point is, and again, it's a matter of objective analysis that cannot be refuted. There have not been three other people like this in modern times, if indeed ever in the history of this great country, who had that kind of charismatic appeal, who could go on television, on radio, who could issue or utter a statement, and immediately tens of millions of people would fall in line. You could not defeat somebody like that at the polls. They couldn't beat John Kennedy, they couldn't beat Bobby Kennedy, and they couldn't silence Martin Luther King. J. Edgar Hoover, at the peak and prime of his power, could not destroy Martin Luther King, this eloquent, wonderful person. And so was it politically with the two Kennedys. So if you have that situation, and you are a great patriot, you see America going to hell in a basket, you see things falling apart, you're looking at 5 more years of John Kennedy and 8 years of Bobby Kennedy. When you sit back and say, well, 13 more years, we'll just wait till we come up to bat in the 9th inning, man, or wait till we have this final period, whether it be hockey or the quarter in basketball or so on. No, this wasn't a sports game, and it wasn't a game being played by sportsmen. It was very real life. These are the kinds of people, I've often said, when they hear the Star-Spangled Banner or see the flag furling in the breeze, they hear and see things differently than we do. It's not that we're not good, loyal Americans, but these kinds of people in their minds are super duper Americans, and they will not tolerate anything which they believe is un-American. And for these kinds of people, John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and the things they represented were or would become un-American. And so, how do you deal with that? What do? You try to say, well, we'll raise a fortune and we'll go on television and we'll put out all kinds of books and brochures and so on, and we'll win back the minds of the American public. No, there's only one way, and that is to destroy them. And I mean that in a literal, physical sense. I mean to assassinate, to execute. The idea that everybody is killed by a lone nut, it's a fascinating one, which is essentially unique to America, at least insofar as Western democracies are concerned, that just somebody out of the blue. And when you get into the Lee Harvey Oswald analysis, and he's been dissected and every single facet of his life has been looked at by all kinds of people. Isn't it a remarkable coincidence that this is a lone nut, but then, gee, how come there are all these ties, Jack Ruby and J.D. Tippit, and all of these connections to people who were tied in and had connections with the CIA and so on. Isn't it remarkable, this lone nut? And what kind of a nut? He knew to get a job in the Texas School Book Depository. He knew where to be positioned. All of these things. That's some lone nut. You see, the inconsistencies of the arguments from the Warren Commission sycophants and defenders and governmental apologists are absolutely incredible. Because on the one hand, depending on what part of the overall situation they're talking about, they have Oswald as an imbecile, a jerk, a sociopathic personality, and then on the other hand, when they want to prove a point, then he becomes this brilliant logistician. He can organize and execute and plan everything in the world. Well, it doesn't fit at all. And of course, then you start to get into the basics. And the point that I've made, and I know it's kind of a broken record reiteration by me, but with all due respect to the input from everybody else on all these important things, and they are important. Why did Oswald go to Mexico City, and what were his relationships with this one and that one, and so on, or the political things that I have referred to with you folks this morning. These are important, very important. But I say this not as a matter of chauvinistic arrogance as a forensic pathologist, forensic scientist, but if you can disprove something with hard science, you see, then you've gone beyond the area of conjecture. Now you're dealing with something that is tangible, and a case can even be thrown out of court if it doesn't fit the bill with forensic science, and you've all read about cases like that. And that brings me to the single bullet theory, which I and others a long time ago labeled as the magic bullet. Commission Exhibit 399, the stretcher bullet. One wonders, gee, if Darrell Tomlinson, the maintenance man at Parkland Hospital, had not needed to go to the men's room that afternoon, would that bullet have ever been discovered? Well, it would have been discovered. It had to be discovered. That's why it was planted there, to tie in. But what those folks did not know was that there was this old man, Abraham Zapruder, who was going to be at Dealey Plaza, and he was going to have this Bell Hall 8mm camera taking pictures. And the Zapruder film was going to establish a chronometer, which when correlated with the chronometer of the test firing of the Manicure Carcano weapon that Oswald is alleged to have used, blows the lone nut theory right out of the water. And here we are today, by the way, in the year 2008. And I want to tell people here who do not know this. When I sat as a member of the Forensic Pathology Panel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was established by Congress in 77 and went through 78 into 79, and I testified before the entire Congressional Committee in 78. And when I met with my 8 colleagues, and they were top-notch, competent experts in forensic pathology. I challenged them. I said, gentlemen, you go back to your respective jurisdictions, your files. You don't have to limit it to your own cases, and you don't have to limit it even to the cases that have been accrued during your tenure as chief medical examiner or coroner. You can go back to the time that your offices were first established. Massachusetts in 1877, New York City 1917, Virginia in 1949, I think, Maryland in 39. You come up with one case, not 1%, but one case in which a bullet produced 7 wounds in 2 men, broke 2 large bones, and emerged essentially pristine, the only deformation being at the base of the bullet from the impact of the firing mechanism, with a weight loss of only 1.5%. Although pieces of the bullet could be seen on x-rays, and these were just basic routine x-rays in 1963. These were before the time of MRIs and CAT scans and so on. Come up with one bullet that did that, and you can shut me up. Well, it is now, 78 to 2008, 30 years later, I'm still waiting for one such case. And anytime people tell you this and they say, oh, bullets do strange things. Oh, I love that. Bullets do strange things. They don't do such strange things like turning and twisting in air. And they don't produce 7 wounds and break 2 large bones and emerge with a weight loss of only 1.5%. One of the things I'm most proud of, you'll forgive this moment of egotistical memory, was when I went down to New Orleans to be a consultant to Oliver Stone, and I met him for the first time, and he gave me the script, and he said, this has been vetted 7, 8 times. We just want you to look it over for accuracy. We're not changing anything, and so on. And there were just a couple of minor errors. They had grams instead of grains for the bullet, and so on. But I remember Mr. Stone, I said, he wasn't yet Oliver to me, I said, Mr. Stone, please think about the single bullet theory. And I laid it out for him, and I knew, because I had talked about this to all kinds of audiences, what the reactions are of people when you show them, and I wish that I could show you now the trajectory. I'll just tell you, the bullet comes into Kennedy, according to the Warren Commission, in his back. That's at the location 5.5, 6 inches below the crest of the shoulder, and it moves upward 11 degrees. And by the way, the entire forensic pathology panel, although they disagreed with me on the final outcome, all had to agree that the trajectory through the president's body is an upward angle of 11 degrees. So you got Oswald shooting from the 6th floor window, hits Kennedy in the back, and the bullet somehow goes upward 11 degrees. By the way, the answer to that you'll get from my colleagues is that the president, if he were stooped down like this, then that can give you an upward trajectory. That's right. To which I say, you show me on the Zapruder film, or you find one bystander who was there at Dealey Plaza that day, will tell you that the president was bent down. What was he doing? He's tying his shoelace, scratching his groin. Is that what he was doing? No, he was looking and waving to the crowd. That's what politicians do. That's the purpose of an open car parade. So you've got the bullet then emerging, and it's moving then, according to the Warren Commission, with Oswald in the back, forward, leftward, and downward. It comes out then, and if you draw a straight line, you'll see it actually would have missed John Connolly, or maybe possibly caught him at the extreme edge of his left shoulder, because Connolly was sitting directly in front of the president. And there's something else they talk about. Well, what if Connolly were sitting here? What if Connolly were sitting there? What if, what if? Yeah, you know, there's an old Jewish expression, if my Bubby had Batesum, she'd be my Zadie. You'll ask anybody who's Jewish at the conference to translate that for you. What if, what if? There's a lot of what ifs in our lifetimes. So the bullet comes out, and then it turns in midair, comes back about 18 inches, hooks around, slams into John Connolly, right posterior axillary area, which simply means in plain lay terms, behind the right armpit. And it goes through his chest, pierces the right lung, destroyed 4 inches of the 5th rib anteriorly, emerges below the level of the nipple. It's still moving downward at an angle of 23 degrees. You can see John Connolly holding that white Stetson hat here. The hat is clearly above nipple level. It's not a matter of conjecturing or speculating. There is the hat at the precise millisecond when he had to have been hit. Or the bullet is moving downward, so it's got to hook up and come around, go into the back of his wrist, cause a comminuted, which means fragmented fracture of the distal end of the radius, one of the two bones from the elbow to the wrist, and a very dense bone. Remember, Connolly was a big bone, 6'4" Texan. So it causes a fragmented fracture of the distal end of the radius, exits from the front of the wrist, and moves downward into his left thigh at an angle of 45 degrees. And that is the stretcher bullet, which on the night of the autopsy, to take you back, on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, at Bethesda Naval Hospital, that was the bullet which Humes and Boswell, who had never done a single medical legal autopsy in their entire careers, had never done a gunshot wound case. Think about that, my friends. Our president, dead as a result of multiple gunshot wounds. John Connolly, multiple gunshot wounds. You got to correlate. What is the sequence? What is the trajectory? What is the relationship of the wounds in one man and the wounds in the other man and the wounds between the two of them? To answer these questions, which are difficult, the top-notch forensic pathologist would have to think about this. I've had several gunshot wounds in the last couple of months. Some guy was just blasted multiple times by a whole bunch of cops and so on. And I spent hours trying to figure it out and getting x-rays and so on. So here are Humes and Boswell, and I've been around in 45 years in this business. I've done 16,000 autopsies. They did not have that kind of experience and expertise. And they concluded that night that the stretcher bullet was from the back, Kennedy's back, that the doctors applying pressure to the front of his chest, cardiac massage, forced the bullet back out through the same channel. That's absurd. It's like a car going into a tunnel, putting it in reverse and backing out. That's not the way bullets work. When they learned the next day that there was a bullet hole in the front of the president's neck, which they had missed, they did not know there was a bullet hole when they did the autopsy, because as far as they were concerned, they were seeing only a tracheostomy. Yes, the surgeons at Parkland had done a tracheostomy, superimposed it upon the bullet hole, had destroyed to a great extent most of the margins of the bullet hole, but an experienced forensic pathologist would have picked it up. Humes and Boswell did not. So the next day, the bullet was from Kennedy's neck. 5 months later, when they had to put together the single bullet theory, having run into the formidable obstacle, the physically incongruous relationship between the timing of Zapruder film and the timing of the test firing of the Menninger-Kirkconnell weapon, now they had to have that bullet go through Kennedy's neck, in through Connolly's chest, in through Connolly's right wrist, into his left thigh, and as of late March, April of '64, the stretcher bullet was now from Connolly's left thigh. And that's why I've called it the magic bullet. It readily and happily obliges you. Whatever you need of it, it does things that no comic book bullet has ever done. And so that is the sine qua non, that is the keystone of the Warren Commission report's conclusions. And that is why I say that whatever you do, and don't back off or don't stop knocking on doors and uncovering everything else in the world in terms of the non-forensic issues, but always keep this in mind too, that it is a physical impossibility for one person to have done the shooting. And then all the other things which you have heard and you will hear more about in terms of the wounds, their locations, their anatomic sites, etc. Another thing I want to point out from a forensic standpoint is the missing brain. It was in August of 1972 when I was granted permission as the first non-government appointed, non-government sponsored forensic pathologist to be given access to the autopsy materials at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., that I pointed out the president's brain was missing. Listed in the inventory of April '65, and then a year and a half later, the end of October '66, when they went over, now Mrs. Kennedy ostensibly having given a gift of all these materials. That's another fascinating thing about this case. So that inventory no longer lists the president's brain, microscopic slides of the skin wounds, and so on. And that was a front page story by then senior reporter Fred Graham with the New York Times, August 27th of '72, in which I reported the president's brain was missing, and here we are 36 years later, and it's still missing. And then people are going to say, oh, it was buried, and so on. You ask them to show you the document. You ask them to show you the statement. You ask them to show you anything from any member of the Kennedy family or anybody else that will prove that the brain was subsequently buried with the president there at Arlington Cemetery. They had every right to do this, the Kennedy family. They had no reason to be embarrassed. So why would they not have simply said, yes, we buried the brain? They've never done it. Not Bobby Kennedy in those early years, not Ted Kennedy in subsequent years to this day, or anybody else. So you keep that in mind. I made reference to this ostensible gift by Jackie Kennedy. Nowhere in the annals of American history will you find a situation in which it has been determined that the surviving spouse or any other member of the family will be the owner, the possessor of materials relating to a homicide. I've asked my colleagues and other people in government and all of you, anytime someone brings this up, you challenge them to show you one case. I don't care if it's from East Overshoe or Podunkville in Missouri, Mississippi, or Pennsylvania, anywhere in the world. You ask them to find one case in which somebody has been shot and the coroner or medical examiner calls in the widow and says, ma'am, I want to give you this box. It's neatly tied and ribboned because we think that you and your children and your family would want to have this as memorabilia. And in the box are the clothing that your husband wore, the x-rays that we took, the weapon that was used to kill him, the bullet fragments. We're giving all of these to you because we want you to have it. There's never been such a case, and there never will be. That's what it did in this case. Why? Because then they could have this constructive gift back from Jackie Kennedy. Ironically, she's probably the last person in the world that would have ever wanted to even touch the bloody clothing of her beloved husband. But by doing this, they could have a gift from her back to the government with the proviso that nobody could see this for 75 years, with the exception that after 5 years, recognized experts in the field of pathology or related science, and so on and so forth, could get in to see it, and that's how I eventually got in. So keep all of these things in mind. Well, I want to wrap it up and allow some time here for questions, but I want to say this. People then ask, well, who did it, and so on, and why. I think I've already addressed why, who. Well, the who follows the why. We know now, I think even the staunchest defenders and the most pusillanimous individuals in government and the most treacherous and diabolically manipulative members of the Warren Commission group, the defenders and sycophants.
Well, we don't know. I mean, but Carl's saying at the other end, the signal stopped coming through. So this year...
They know that they're off, but Ben says it's his fault, but they're going to get back on in 1 sec here.
Okay. The Wecht Institute this year held a... might want to sit one row back because they've got a lot of wires and everything up here. There's a seat right behind you.
Okay, they're back.
I personally believe it was at the highest level of government. I don't think it was an official government conspiracy in terms of Johnson or the head of the CIA sitting down and saying we're going to do this or so on. I think it was a rogue element, as I have referred to them. I'll bet you there weren't 6 people, if there were that many, who knew everything that was going on, and then other people did other things, so-called right to know, and if I tell you, I'll have to kill you. Everybody did different things. I think the Mafia had their role. Certainly, I don't believe for one moment that the Mafia would have ever dared, on their own, to undertake the assassination of a president. They would have been wiped out and destroyed overnight by Bobby Kennedy, and indeed by everybody else, even John Kennedy's enemies in the United States government. What can we do about this? Well, again, people have different thoughts. Some people think we got to try to get a grand jury convened, try to bring charges against this one or that one or so on. I want to remind you that it's a formidable task, but one which we must accept and continue to fight for. But the United States Congress, and this is something that even people who are involved in the case lose sight of.
It's all the way up.
Maybe some don't even know. The House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that there was a conspiracy.
Yeah, but it
they didn't
doesn't have any
accept
more volume
all
here. It's a
of the
hearing.
things I've said or all of the things that other Warren Commission critics have said, but their ultimate conclusion was that it wasn't like the Warren Commission said. That's the United States Congress, a bipartisan commission. And yet, what has happened? 1979, and here we are, 29 years later, and nothing's happened. So you got to recognize the fact that the government is going to continue to stonewall. From a scientific standpoint, I don't know. They're not going to dig up the president. I don't even talk about that, not because I'm against exhumation. They're digging up people. They dug up people going back into the early 60s from some of the civil rights violations, and good for them. I'm glad they did it. In Mississippi, Alabama, and so on. And that's another point to keep in mind, too. Somebody said, well, why not? Well, I'm just saying why not, because the Kennedys are not going to allow it. That's why not. Other people can do it for other reasons, but not in the Kennedy case. And they should. And that could give us access to evidence, but it's just not going to happen. So, and Connolly took the fragments to his grave with him. We tried to get those, even though Janet Reno asked the FBI agent to go to Nellie Connolly and get permission when he died. She declined. So it's tough going, folks. It's really tough. I don't have a panacea. I don't have a simplistic plan to lay out. And other people have spent a great deal of time on this. I'm in favor of anything that will lead to this. I am delighted by the fact that 75% or more of Americans continue to reject the Warren Commission report, despite programs such as the recent Discovery program this past Sunday, absurd. Look on blood spatter analysis, a textbook by Stuart James, Paul Kish, and Sutton on the fact that you cannot make as specific determinations as to angle and trajectory and distance from blood spatter patterns and so on. Well, of course, this was completely ignored. But programs like that, they hurt us. And I'm sure that they win over a few people. And we've lost some people, so to speak, some of whom, as far as I'm concerned, are just treacherous, self-serving individuals. I despise them and their tactics, and I just abhor them. And you know whom I am speaking of. Certainly one person who played a major role in this program last Sunday. But despite those kinds of people, those traitorous, treacherous, self-aggrandizing sycophants, we stand with 75% of the American public. And isn't it amazing? You might not get 75% of the American public to vote in favor of baseball, apple pie, motherhood, and sex, but they stood firm with us on the assassination of the President of the United States of America in rejecting the Warren Commission report. That's what you got to keep in mind. That is the strength. That is the continuing formidable force that unites us and that gives us the courage and the stamina, the perseverance, the tenacity to hold on. Keep fighting for this. For those of you who are young, 20s and 30s, I predict you will come to know the truth. I only wish that I could be around. I thank you for giving me this opportunity, John, especially for having arranged it. And John, if you have any time, I'm happy to spend a little bit of time in responding to questions which I understand will be emailed in here to my son, Ben. Thank you, folks. Have a great convention, and best wishes to all of you for a relaxing and enjoyable Thanksgiving holiday.
Do you have a way to type the questions, Carl, or does you have a second?
Yeah.
The Wecht.
No, regrettably, I'm being asked if I can. I'm
somebody.
being asked if I can comment on my own case. I would love to, but my attorneys would strangle me, so I can't. But when the case is over, you won't be able to stop me. So keep it in mind. In the meantime, there are people who do know a lot about the case, and I guess you can Google things and so on and so forth. It's not over yet, but I'm not cocky or complacent and suggesting that it doesn't mean anything. But I want you all to know, my friends, that life goes on. I'm very busy. I did 3 autopsies yesterday. I got 3 more as soon as I leave you folks here this morning. Lecturing and writing. Oh, by the way, I have a new book. It'll come out in early January. I'm sorry it won't be on John F. Kennedy, but if you're interested in Anna Nicole Smith and Daniel Smith and the deaths of the patients at Memorial Hospital in New Orleans and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and some fascinating murder cases, the Von Don Westerfield case and the Crow case in the West Coast, keep in mind a question of murder, and that'll be out. So I am very, very busy, and I'm fortunate to have a wonderful family. All my 4 children and their spouses and my 11 grandchildren live here in Pittsburgh. So life goes on, and we'll deal with these people, and your friendship and your support mean a great deal to me. Do I think the autopsy photos were faked, I'm asked? Well, a lot has been done on this.
Carl, do you know where he's getting these questions?
I'm going to defer to Bob Groden and people who have the technical expertise.
Because I'd like
am
people here to be
involved
able to ask.
with pictures all the time in my autopsies, and there's certain things I could see. But when you get into some of these sophisticated forgeries, I don't have that kind of expertise. What I want to say is to those people who say that this is faked and the Zapruder film is faked and twisted around. So remember this, folks, you can't have it both ways. We have to fight this case. That doesn't mean if there is something that is definitely fallacious, morally, ethically, legally, in every way, we have a responsibility to point it out. But I'm just saying, before you engage, and we've got firm scientific basis on that everything out there is fake and forged.
The feed gets blocked by broadband.
Because you're what do they say? Throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
No, I don't want this
It
website.
is live, absolutely relevant. The signal gets
Which
blocked,
question?
but it still keeps coming, and it'll do that on a lot of videos. Just how the broadband
There we
feed.
go.
Streaming.
Where is that? At the bottom? David Lipton's body alteration theory. Well, yes, I do. And I do not believe that the body was altered. I have had this basic disagreement, and I've been assailed and attacked by the Liftonites for this. Nothing personal. David Lipton has done a tremendous amount of work on this case, and he deserves a great deal of credit. But when you talk about altering wounds, remember this: nobody knew which wounds were going to be there. It's not like you have a dummy setup or a stage situation. You don't know where the wounds are going to be. You don't know about the Zapruder film. You don't know about the Menaker Carcano and the test firing and so on. To talk about revising an exit wound to make it appear to be entrance, an entrance wound to make it appear to be exit, and so on. You know what you're talking about? I guess conceivably with top-notch plastic surgeons, maybe it could be done, but even that would fall apart in the hands and before the skilled, experienced eyes of forensic pathologists. And do you know that you're going to have 2 totally inexperienced guys like Humes and Boswell involved in this, rather than Milton Halpern and Russell Fisher and Alan Morris and Dick Ford and Geoffrey Mann, the top-notch forensic pathologists who were around in those days and who should have been called in to do this autopsy? So no, I must say, and again, not because of any personal feelings or pride or so on, but I do not believe that the body was altered, because I don't see how they could have altered it. I don't see how they could have known what to alter, what to fit in, how it was going to play out. No, I think it is just an unsubstantiated. It sounds good. I know it's been a book that people continue to talk about and so on. Fine, go and buy it and read it for yourselves. But from a forensic pathology standpoint, I think there can be no basis for it.
Okay, are the people here want to do questions?
Yeah.
Just ask one more time.
Or you can just call Ben or something.
Just ask one more time.
Call him.
What's that?
Yeah.
Just ask us any more questions.
Yeah, let's-
Anything coming
let's
from
do that.
Dallas? Pardon me? Oh, no, is there any more, are there any more questions, John? I'm sorry. Anything more? Okay. Well, John, and you got all the top experts there, or many of them, and you'll kick this around. Again, I thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure being with you. I wish I could have been there in person. Have a great holiday, and maybe we'll shoot for next
Okay.
year.
Yeah.
Stay with it, folks.
That's it. Yeah, well, we were gonna give you the questions by phone. Huh? Yeah. Okay, we got a few minutes, but anyone take this, John?
Okay. Hi, we couldn't get through on the chat from this end. This, this is John Judge. Right now, there's no signal coming through.
The physicians and so on. Snobbery,
And
arrogance.
we couldn't type in any questions from here, but wanted to ask you some. Now it came through. Yeah, but it's, I'm just telling you, we can't type questions to you. We have to ask you them on the phone. Understood. Well, one is, why don't you ask him to talk about the 2 conferences that you did there and how people can get record of them, since you wanted that mentioned. Does anyone here have a specific question for Dr. Wecht? Because I can try to relay it.
Committees and so on.
Yeah.
I've done okay. I'm not whining or crying. I've done quite well.
What is it?
And I think I have a reputation in
Okay. Here, Fink, all right.
I think being asked to consult the
Bases around the world, as well as throughout the United States of America.
Anybody else had a question?
John,
John's
it's
told
fine.
me here and that
Committees,
it's been
colleges.
30 years since he and I lectured together at BU. He always
Okay.
responds to that.
American pathologists, American Society
Ben.
of Clinical Pathologists, et cetera, et cetera.
Can you hear me, Ben?
but yes,
Dr. Fink?
it's a combination of snobbery, of obeisance to the government, of a lack
Dr.
of
Fink and the role of his
courage
role in
to stand up
probing the
and
wound.
say,
There's a
hey, the
question,
king
and
has
Ed Tatro said
bequests
that he
and
was
grants and research projects and so on. And so
Yeah,
on.
Dr. Fink and his role in probing the bullet
Etc. Yes, indeed. I'm not aware of
at the
any
autopsy.
other situation.
And also Ed Tatro is here, who lectured with Cyril 30 years ago at, I think he said Boston U, and just wanted to see if he remembered or say hi. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, we're having a little trouble with feed. I guess he was getting questions from the online chats, and that's what he's been responding to. His image is frozen at the moment, but he's frozen at the moment. I don't know what's going on. Is that our end, Carl? Or?
Yeah, this is all in right now. Waiting for something.
It'll feed through in a minute, but he's talking about Fink.
Well,
We're trying to reload it. Sorry. I'm sure whatever signal we've got, it'll.
If you think you are a qualified forensic pathologist.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if we can get him to say anything.
And
Okay.
who that voice was, we've never known. Something that Dr. Will, you just move ahead, we're in charge here, so on. By the way, can you imagine a forensic autopsy in which you've got 36 people, all kinds of big shots and so on, telling you what to do? I've never experienced that.
We got
I know
signal
no
now.
other case in which that has occurred, but in this case, it did.
Yeah, I just finished saying in this case it did.
It's intoevidence.net.
Now he's talking about into evidence.
Into
This is their
evidence.
conference that they had a few years
For the
ago.
2008 conference. Contact my son, Ben Wecht. He is the program director for the Institute of Forensic Science and Law. And he can be reached at area code 412-396-1049. Area code 412-396-1049. John Judge has the address, phone number too, in case anybody didn't have a pencil to write this time. But Ben Wecht will give you all that information.
Okay. Here's Jim, maybe just two more.
Yes,
right
we're
here.
getting
sure.
him. We're getting him.
Right, starting right there.
Do I have an opinion
Yeah.
on Noguchi's conclusion that
Did you mention
well,
Tatro?
you're wrong. You're 1.5 inches. Yeah, I was a formal consultant to Dr. Tom Noguchi, a good personal friend, and highly respected forensic pathologist.
Yeah.
There's no question that the shot that killed Bobby Kennedy was fired 1 to 1.5 inches behind his right ear. No question at all. And here's another example. I'm sorry, we don't have another hour to spend on the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. The power of the government. The ultimately dead, and myself, and Tom, and his excellent staff, and there's a unanimity of opinion. There's no disagreement that that shot was fired 1 to 1.5 inches behind Bobby Kennedy's ear with a slightly forward trajectory. How do you have
Just send him our sincere thanks for joining us.
ever, with the muzzle of his
And
gun, 1
send him our
inch away
sincere
from
thanks
Bobby
for joining
Kennedy's
us
head
here
and behind
today
him.
and taking the time.
It's just absolutely incredible. The blood spatter evidence.
I will.
I've already referred to that. That gets to be very technical.
It's great, yeah, a lot of fun.
But I refer you to an excellent textbook. In fact, these are
All right.
people whom I know and I've worked with. Just the way it sounds. James, Stuart James, Kish, K-I-S-H. If you want the name of the book, it's Blood Spatter Analysis. I think, and if you need more information, I can get it to you through John. But you Google that, Stuart James, Paul Kish, blood spatter analysis. The point is that you cannot make the kinds of definitive, specific, exclusionary statements that were set forth in that horrendous, one-sided propaganda program that Discovery TV put on last Sunday. Do I think that Humes and Boswell were trying to hide things? I don't think they were trying to hide things, that it was sui generis, that it emanated from their hearts and minds and souls. I've already told you, they had never done a gunshot wound case. Think about that. And they had no background information. Had not called in because civilian forensic pathologists would have told them, hey, you want me to do the autopsy? I'm going to do it. You're not going to tell me how to do it. You want to do it? Here's the scalpel, Mr. General. You go and do it. But Humes and Boswell, and Fink too, military career guys, 15 years in, they're not about to tell some 4-star general or before Star Admiral what to do by going, well, no, I don't think that to prove their inexperience, they were directed and they moved down that path. And that's the great, great, lamentable tragedy of this case.
That's it.
Well, I guess that's it then. Thank you again, folks. Have a great finishing portion of the program and a wonderful time next week. Thanks.
So they had a conference just about a month ago also at the Wecht Institute at Duquesne University called Making Sense of the 60s, and it was great. A lot of forensic pathologists there, Dr. Lee and Cyril and here other key people. So I was really glad that he could join us today. He had wanted to be here, and we figured out at least a way to somewhat get him in here with all the technical difficulties that accrue between the internet and sound systems and everything we're working with. But I'm glad that you could hear him. Paul Connor, a young Navy intern at the time, was in the autopsy room, and when we talked to him years ago, that's when we found out there were so many people watching, that this was a teaching morgue, and they were sitting up on these bleacher seats watching the thing. And he said at one point there was a guy sitting up there smoking a big cigar in military uniform and grinning, and he said that Commander Hume went by him because he was up at Kennedy's Head, and he said, "Go tell that SOB with the stogie to get the hell out of here." And Connor left and walked toward the bleachers, and when he got a little closer, turned on his heel and came back. And when Hume went around the table again, and he said, "Did you tell him what I said?" And he said, "Commander Hume, that's General Curtis LeMay." And so that was the end of that discussion, because he outranked him a little bit. But all we know is that the person that asked about the autopsy, like what wounds, gave him the instructions, was a general. It could be an Air Force general. They have generals too. Doesn't have to be an Army general. Yeah, that's right. But they said it was a general is all they said. But I think LeMay is a pretty likely candidate. I think LeMay was actually one of the major planners of the assassination, and was there grinning and smoking his cigar while they botched the autopsy. There was an attempt to take Reagan to Bethesda. And in fact, the Navy yelled all night, according to the guy at the emergency room at GW, to get the body out of GW and get him up to Bethesda. And I believe they actually had him in the car going to Bethesda after the shooting. And then when Haig emerged from the Situation Room where they were arguing about who was going to take control, and Haig was trying to get a nuclear command box going, and he said, "Gentlemen, I'm in charge here until the Vice President returns." I think that the deal was cut to let him live, but that was about all he would do. He could go to Camp David and watch movies, but Bush came in, and the Hinckley and the Bush families were like this, financially and socially. They said that night that Hinckley's older brother was going to have dinner with Neil Bush, but when they got the news, they canceled, and they said in the Washington Post that was ironic. And I used to say, well, if you heard that Robert Kennedy, Oswald's older brother, was going to have dinner with one of LBJ's daughters on November 22nd, 1963, would you call that ironic? Or you think it means something? I say, it's okay, I'm an irony theorist. I think it might mean something. We're glad to have Dr. Wecht in our camp, and he's been with us from the beginning of the founding of COPA and came to the early meetings, and great guy. But these conferences, if you can get the DVDs of both of them, they'll be worth your time. They have some of the leading forensic people in Prague, and Joling were there, and a lot of people that have all the credentials. So it was a great conference that they just did in Pittsburgh. So we have Ed Tatro with us, thankfully, a longtime researcher and investigator into the case, and he was kind enough to come over. Got to Dallas. We can't pay people's way, but he came with some help from friends. Yes, he mooshed his way. Somebody else brought him, so we'll thank them too, whoever they are, the anonymous donors. And
That's the only way retired high school English teachers can get here. They have to mooch their way in.
So I was going to have Ben go second, but if that's not an inconvenience to you, Ben, I'll have Ed talk. And
Can we shut that off? I'd rather not be videos.
oh, you don't want to be taped? All right.
Now, do you have the CD player? a CD player?
Yeah.
Yes, we can play a CD. What do you got? Just give it to Carl. He can set it up for you.
I don't know that that will work. I'm the one that's going to have to kind of work it, so I don't know that. If you want me to just do the chapter, I'll do that instead. I brought a chapter from...
What do you need to do with the CD? I mean, could you put it in the other
Well,
thing and use it,
I'm the
or?
one that's going to have to play the thing, stop it, you know, so it would be kind of difficult for him. You know, he wouldn't do it because he doesn't know what I'm doing.
Is that possible for him on the other laptop, or?
I have a couple...
We have a DVD player. We're trying to figure out if that would play the CD.
No, I won't play. I don't think a DVD player.
It is? Yeah.
Are there any parts of your presentation that get taped or,
I'd rather not be videotaped.
you know?
Yeah, I'd rather
Do you
not.
want the mic?
It would be a lot easier.
Do you want to try it in there?
Serious efforts to intimidate me. After I was on the History Channel, I was threatened on the plane coming home from Texas that week.
He can put the CD in here, I think, so if you can give him the,
Well, I mean, am I gonna know,
and then you can do whatever you want with
No,
it.
when to stop it started.
well, that's gonna be a little, see, and that's gonna be kinda tricky.
Well, then don't do it anymore.
Yeah, I think it'll be tricky. If I had a CD player where I could actually control it without any difficulty.
So you
we can-
wouldn't be able to punch the buttons on that,
I
or?
think it'll be very hard. This is, you know, this is
Okay.
kinda complicated.
I don't think so.
Reeves conducted his investigation out of the 11th Naval District in San Diego, California. Eventually, he sent his report to ONI in Washington. Shortly thereafter, Reeves saw 12 to 15 119 reports concerning Oswald, and then 8 to 10 more Oswald 119 reports after the assassination. In September of 1997, Reeves visited the National Archives with the intention of retrieving copies of his own Oswald files, only to find that they were missing. In fact, all references to his own existence as an ONI officer working at the 11th Naval District, San Diego, were gone also. They couldn't even prove he was in naval intelligence. Subsequently, Reeves contacted the ARRB, which conducted an extensive search for Reeves' records without success. Although researcher Malcolm Blunt managed to uncover FBI documents confirming Reeves' position as a security supervisor at the District Intelligence Office, San Diego, it appears evident that the ONI security investigative reports compiled after Oswald's defection to Russia were deliberately kept from the Warren Commission and the HSCA. Blunt discovered proof of ONI obfuscation of the files and an FBI document dated November 28, 1963, which stipulates that USMC Colonel W.L. Ablett advised files reflecting security clearance investigation concerning Oswald maintained at headquarters, 11th Naval District, San Diego. Therefore, the files did exist the week after JFK's demise. While ONI documents were secretly destroyed, the testimony of Don Reynolds was quietly buried for decades, thanks to the FBI and the Warren Commission and the National Archives. Such a legacy is a national disgrace for all Americans to bear. I have 2 pages to go and I'm done.
Okay.
The bleak picture depicted through the history of Don Reynolds does offer one sliver of ironic justice, at least in reference to Governor Conley. Mickey Herskowitz, Conley's autobiographical ghostwriter, attempted to garner sympathy for the deceased politician with the following epistle. Conley suffered from pulmonary fibrosis, a rare disease that involves scarring of the lungs. His doctors emphasized that there is no known cause. The governor had made no previous disclosure of his condition. He had one healthy lung and one that had been punctured by splinters of bone when a bullet tore through his chest and shattered part of his 5th rib. John Conley died possibly from a bullet fired 30 years ago. Texas Mafia researchers know better than to offer condolences. Now, Conley in death could have helped provide some resolution to the assassination mystery by allowing the removal, after his death, of the tiny bullet fragment left in his leg to be scientifically tested by independent experts to determine its origin. But no, why not just leave it in there and obfuscate the crime of the previous century a while longer? John Conley was a most unique individual, one who continued to cover up a conspiratorial murder even after he was dead. Conley's legal representatives and family members have every intention of continuing the charade in his name to protect his name. By the way, there's a cartoon after all this was going on of Cyril Wecht standing at Conley's grave with a shovel behind his back. Kind of ties in what we saw. After all, to do the right thing would expose him for what he was, a participant in a conspiratorial assassination of the President of the United States. A Connolly spokesman responded to the possibility of removing the medal from the deceased politician's leg by offering the following ludicrous comment. Mr. Connolly was available for 30 years for that purpose, and in all that time, no such request was made by any responsible authority. The family will resist any effort to disturb the body. Well, first, Connolly never volunteered to settle the issue regarding the most important political murder of the last 4 decades, and of course, the description as to what constitutes a responsible authority would defy definition, wouldn't it? Originally, Dallas was scheduled to be an evening affair, but the governor thought the evening affair should be in Austin and that we should hit Dallas around noontime. So testified Ken O'Donnell, JFK's trusted sidekick, to the Warren Commission. Connolly had arranged JFK's rendezvous with LB with death, and one man knew that fact better than anyone else, Lyndon Baines Johnson. An Atlantic Monthly article in 1971 written by journalist Ronnie Duggar revealed that in late December '63, a reporter saw President Johnson inscribe the text of a speech to Connolly, quote, "John and Nellie, who made all this possible." Arguing against LBJ's sentiment would be foolhardy, especially if one is innocent of perpetrating an assassination. Propaganda citing Connolly's contradictory views has subsisted for decades. Years ago, when a proliferation of books and magazines flooded the country with rational criticisms of the Warren Commission findings, Connolly directed then chairman of the Texas Turnpike Authority, D. Kelly, to conduct a private and independent investigation of the assassination. Kelly's analysis concluded that Oswald had acted alone, which apparently quelled all of Connolly's concerns. 30 years later, Bradley O'Leary, a political insider who considered Connolly his mentor, concocted an elaborate conspiratorial theory which concluded the French mob linked to the regime of South Vietnam's President Diem, who was assassinated with Kennedy's alleged approval 3 weeks prior to JFK's own murder, sought revenge for Diem's murder by assassinating Kennedy in Dallas. The manuscript is a patchwork quilt of tentative associations, lame meanderings, and motives which steer clear of the Texas Mafia, which controlled Connolly and LBJ, whose ghosts must be smiling at their political lackeys. Still later, in May of 2001, a Canadian newspaper published a bogus story which claimed that JFK was about to reveal the truth about aliens crashing in Roswell in 1947. The professor of fictional Lawrence Merrick from Cambridge, Massachusetts, asserted that Kennedy's Dallas trademark speech, handwritten on note cards, stated, "Citizens of Earth, we are not alone." It's Kennedy. Can't make this shit up, you know? Kennedy supposedly showed them to Governor Connolly, who somehow managed to salvage the blood-stained index cards and place them in a safety deposit box. Some UFO media outlets actually reprinted the story and then wisely retracted it once Professor Merrick could not be located for comment. Imagine John Kennedy improvising a speech of such magnitude. Imagine John Kennedy sharing such a momentous speech only with John Connolly, a politician whom Kennedy regarded with nothing but disdain. Imagine Connolly, near death, managing to retrieve the blood-stained index cards and hiding them for decades. Unfortunately, such disinformation not only sells newspapers, but it also diverts attention away from the Texas conspirators